Hello, hi everyone. I guess I am audible. Let me check that. Perfect. I'm audible here. So yeah, welcome to the session five of Flutter Chowk, a month-long bootcamp that Flutter Nagpur has been having. Today, if you want to be a part of Flutter Nagpur's community, you can scan the QR and join our Discord. We entertain all types of doubts, queries. We appreciate you sharing your work and sharing knowledge about Flutter with us. We believe in growing together and learning together. So yeah, scan this QR. We do have a lot of swags throughout the session, and in fact, we had swags throughout the boot camp. So ensure that you are active in the stream, participating, commenting, and we would be choosing a random winner who is really active in the stream for one of the teas, maybe super based tea. I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Rohit Ranjan. He is a DevRel intern at AppWrite, and today's session is all about playing with states and Flutter and managing them using Riverpod. So, Rohit, the stage is yours.
So, hi everyone. Just let me know in the chat that if I'm audible or not. Laksh, am I audible? Okay, sure. So, hi everyone. I am Rohit Ranjan. Actually, currently I worked as a DevRel intern at AppWrite. So, all of you who don't know what AppWrite is. AppWrite is a backend as a service platform similar to Firebase, but it is open source and free to use. So, if you want to check out AppWrite, check out it at appwrite.io. Now, in this session, I would be talking about Riverpod, and I haven't prepared any slides for this talk. While we will be live coding live, and I will be explaining all kinds of providers that are available with Riverpod, and also what's the difference between Riverpod and provider state management package. So, if you don't know, the Riverpod package is actually an extension of provider. There are some limitations with provider package. That's why the Riverpod package was introduced. So I'm gonna give a walkthrough of what different kinds of providers are present in Riverpod and how you can use them into a different kind of applications, right? So, so let's directly jump into creating a project of Flutter. So I will share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Just let me know if you can see my screen. Okay. Okay, so let's just create a new Flutter project. I will be starting from the scratch and show you how to add a Riverpod into your app and how you can do different kind of providers. So let's create a new Flutter project and let's name it Riverpod sample. And let's wait. Okay, my project is created. And so let me also start the emulator. So before getting started with Riverpod, we need to understand why do we need a state management package, just like provider, Riverpod, or any kind of state management package. So internally, by default, how Flutter handles state is by using this something known as set state. So the default application which comes with Flutter, you can see that set state is being called to increment the counter. That you get a default app which is a counter application, and once you click on this button, the counter gets updated. It means that the state of that counter or the value of that counter is getting updated and getting reflected on the screen, right? So how it is being done is by calling this set state method. Now, what does this set state do is it recalls your build method. So whenever you need to update your UI, you need to recall this. Let me just zoom it in. Okay, so whenever you need to update the UI of our application, you need to call this build method again and again. So every time the set state is being called, or every time the increment button is being created, the build method is called again and again. So what kind of demerits does it have? So let me just quickly run this application and we can start with it. And so what I was talking about, like set state have different kinds of demerits, which are covered through different types of state management techniques like provider and Riverpod. But what are those exactly? What are those benefits? We'll just get to it once my app starts. Meanwhile, you can tell me if you have used any kind of state management techniques like provider or Riverpod or GetX. You can tell me in the comments. Okay, so no problem. So even if you haven't used any kind of state management techniques, I'll guide you through a process in which you can, if you're using set state, how you can transition to different state management techniques like Riverpod. How you can replace set state into your application and use Riverpod instead, right? So anyone who has used provider before or currently uses provider into their Flutter applications? Okay, so my app is up and running. Now, what was the issue that I was talking about using with build method? So inside build method, let us just print a statement and see how many times the build method is getting called. So let's give it build method. Um, so it's been a while I've used Flutter. So if I make any mistakes, we'll correct it altogether. All right. So let's just rebuild this application and see. This is the first time that you can see the build method call into your debug console. Can you see this? We are getting a message known as build method call. This is the first time that this build method is getting called for this page, and because of this line is getting printed, right? And if I increment this counter, you can see every time I increment this counter, this build method is getting called. So if let's suppose there are tens of widgets into my scaffold. I have used a column. Instead of these two widgets, I have 10 widgets inside my column, and only my counter is getting updated, right? So only if my counter is getting updated, this build method would rebuild this entire widget, which would cost me in terms of my performance and the size of the application. Like if it's a single widget, like there not be much effect on the performance, but there if for example if there are many widgets inside a single column or a single class, and if you're calling set state just to update a single widget, you will it will cost you in terms of performance. So how we can reduce it? So we can use something, we can use Riverpod. So let's add Riverpod. So you need to add this dependency, which is Flutter Riverpod. And there are many dependencies of Flutter for Riverpod. You can also find a Riverpod package in pub.dev that you can use purely for Dart files. Like it's not independent of Flutter. That's the best part about Riverpod. Even if you want to use it on your Dart applications or Dart code, you can use Riverpod. Right. So in my pubspec.yaml, you can see I have my latest version of Riverpod installed. Now let's try to rebuild this application and see how you can use Riverpod for this. So I'm creating a folder known as providers and a name provider.dart, right? So this is the place where we will keep all our providers. And as I said that there are many types of providers that Riverpod provide. So first one is provider itself, and there is something known as state provider. Okay, let me just disable the creator copilot. Okay, we have state provider, we have change notify. Okay, we have change notify provider, we have state notify provider, we have something known as future provider, and we have also a stream provider. So these are all the providers which Riverpod provides us and which you can use your applications, and they have different use cases. We are going to discuss every provider, and not every provider in detail, but all the provider that you will going to use in your day-to-day application. We are going to discuss all these providers that are provided by Riverpod, right? So what we can do is just create a simple widget and delete all of this code. Let's make it a stateless widget instead. Instead of full widget, it would be a stateless widget. And just removing the boilerplate code. We don't need an app bar currently. And let's also remove all the code present in the center widget. And this will just have a child. And let's say I'm displaying my name. Right? And we also don't need a floating action button. Let's just remove this print statement and rebuild our app. So you can see that my name is getting displayed. You can just increase the size. So I'm giving it a size of 30. So therefore you can see the name, right? Now, let's just remove this comments because we are not going to need this. Okay, so let's discuss the first type of provider. So the first type of provider is provider itself. Now, how you can use it? So provider is basically it just returns you a value. If you want to create some global variables, you can use a provider. It will not help you to change the value of that provider. You can just access that value of the provider. So how you can do is you can just create a provider. So as you can see, the Flutter Riverpod package is getting imported, and we are using the Flutter Riverpod, the provider which is present inside my Riverpod package. Now, so and this is something known as ref. This ref is used to interact with the providers. Whenever you want to interact or change the value of a provider or get the value of a provider, you will need this ref thing. So let's just create a string. So as soon as you provide it a string, you will see that it has a type of provider string. Now, if I change it to something known as true, which is a Boolean value, it will by default on its own understand the return type and change the return type to Boolean. Similarly, if it's something like an integer, it would change to an integer, and if you make it a double, it would change it to double. So currently I need to provide it a name, and even if it takes this value on its own, you can explicitly provide it a return type, something like this. So this is your provider, and let's see how you can read this provider in your application. So for reading this provider, let's just, what you can do is wrap your text into a builder. Now this builder would be a consumer widget. Now if you move over this consumer and look at this implementation, you can see this consumer widget is implemented inside my Flutter Riverpod package. And if you look at this implementation, it says that it's a base class of widgets that wants to listen to providers. And that's what we need to do, right? We need to listen to this provider. So we are using a consumer, and inside of a context, we also inside my builder, I also need to pass on context and child. Now, as I said, you have to use this ref to read the value of these providers. So how you can do it? You can say something known as final name and just use ref, and you will get list of all the list of all the functions that are present with ref. So let's say I just want to read that value of the provider. So I will use something known as watch. Now, what does this watch do? It returns the value exposed by a provider. Like that's what we need, right? We need the value of that provider. So let's just name what. Let's name it name provider so that we know that this is the variable that is a provider. And let's import this provider, right? So as you can see, now this name can be accessed here. Now, if you reload this app, you will most probably get an error, right? So what does it say is that no provider scope is found. So before you can use Riverpod in your package, in your application, you need to wrap your my app into something known as provider scope. So why do we need this provider scope? Now, as you saw that we can just globally create providers anywhere we want into our application. It doesn't need to be encapsulated inside a class or any method. You can just globally create this and read it from anywhere. So just to keep a track of all the providers present in your application, you need this provider scope and on top of your my application. So if I just reload my app now, and I'm getting an error. Okay, let's just resolve these errors. And we're getting one more error. Let's see. Okay. So as you can see, my name is getting printed. So how to ensure that this name is the same name that this provider is providing us? Let's change it to something like Flutter Nagpur. And if I now reload my application, you can see Flutter Nagpur gets printed. But as I said that you can't use this provider to change its value. You can't modify this provider using if it's only a provider, right? Like if you try to do something like, let's just remove this. And if you try to assign it a value, you can't assign it, right? It gives an error. So what if we need to change the value of this provider? For that, there is something known as a state provider. How to use state provider? Using this state provider, let's just build a counter application once again. So I will give it a value of counter provider. And instead of simply a provider, it would be a state provider. And REST implementation is same. Now my counter would be a integer whose value would be increasing. So I would be providing it an initial value of 0. And will also explicitly define it a value of integer, right? Now let's see how we can use that to rebuild a counter application, right? So we have a consumer, but one thing you might notice that this consumer can only be used inside a single widget. Let's suppose I need a floating action button here, and if that needs to interact with the provider, again need to use this consumer widget. So to resolve this issue, what you can do is, instead of using a stateless widget, you can directly use a consumer widget. Now, once you change this type of stateless widget to a consumer widget, you need to pass one more parameter to your build method, build context, widget ref. Now, this ref is globally accessible throughout my application, right? So, okay, let's just you press this button this many times. Similar to this kind of text is being printed, right? And let's wrap it inside a column so that we can also display our counter. So inside my column, I would again have a text which has an initial value of 0. So let's just make it all in the center using main axis alignment. All right, and just reduce the size of it. Let's copy this style. All right. So we have our widgets. Let's just give it a constant. All right. So now we need a floating action button through which we can increase the value of that provider, increase the value of that counter, right? So we have floating action button. Now floating action button, as you know, takes two parameters. First is the on press parameter. We need to do something once floating action button is clicked. And it also has a child parameter. Let's just provide the default icon, icons.add. Right. So as you can see, I also have my floating action button here. Now I need to read this value of this provider. So let's just remove this consumer widget. We don't need this anymore. Okay. We need to remove this manually. So let's just reload my application. And now I need to read this value of my counter provider, right? So how can I do that? As I said, now we have access to ref everywhere inside my widget. So I can just do final counter equal to ref dot. Simply, I can just watch the value of this provider, and this would be counter provider. Now you can display this text here, and you need to convert it to a string because it's of type integer, and remove this constant. You can use constant over here. Okay, we are reading the value of this counter. Now we need to change this value of I mean to say that we need to change the value of the provider. Now how you can do is, you have something known as inside your ref, you have access to something known as ref.read. Now what does this read do? It reads the provider without listening to it. And one thing that you need to ensure that this do not use read inside a build method. Inside a build method, you have to use watch to read the value of a provider. Now you might say that now here I'm using read inside my build method, right? How can I do that? So if you see its implementation, you can see that it can be used inside event handlers like onPress. So there's no issue in using it inside event handlers, but you can't use read inside build context. Like it's not recommended to use read. If you want to read the value of a provider, use watch. So, but this ref.read also does not give me a value. Like I can't change the value of this provider. And if I try to access this, I just get some all the string variables or what the so this is my counter provider. So let's just read counter provider. And if you see, I'm getting all the methods that are applicable on an on an integer, right? Because my counter provider is a type of integer, but I can't change this value. How can I change this value? Is on counter provider you can use something known as notifier. Now inside notifier, you have access to state. You can use this state and just simply say state plus plus. Now this would work perfectly fine. And see, if I am pressing this button, the counter is getting incremented. But there is a better method to do this. Instead of using state plus plus, you can use something known as state dot. Inside your state class, you have something access to a method known as update. Now, here you can do state plus plus. So if you reload your application, okay, let me just update it. Okay, it looks like it isn't working. Let's leave it. We will be using state plus plus, right? So once you use state plus plus, it means that you are telling that state to increase its value, and because it is an integer, it would increase its value by 1 unit, or you can say increase its value by 1. So if you click on this button, we'll see that the value of this counter gets increasing. And you might notice that I haven't used set state anywhere in this application, right? I haven't used set state to update the state. It's all being done by this provider. As soon as the value of this provider changes, this ref.watch changes the value of this counter, and this counter is getting displayed here. So Riverpod handles all your state management and updates the UI as soon as the UI is changed, right? So this is how you use state provider. Now, before I move to different types of provider, does anyone have any doubt? Like, anyone have any doubt in provider and state provider? Okay. If there's no doubt, you can just type in like everything is clear and I can continue with different kinds of provider. Like, we have a lot of providers to cover. Okay, let's move forward. Now, the next type of provider is my change notifier provider. Now, before coming to change notifier provider, I would like you to, I will be covering state notifier provider. And why I'm covering state notifier provider, you will get to know. So, what is a state notifier provider? Now, let's consider this example of counter provider, right? The way we build our counter application using state provider. Now we will be using state notifier provider to implement the same application. I will see the and you will see the difference. What is the difference between these two providers? So let's say I'm naming is a counter notifier provider, and it's just a state notifier provider. Instead of using a state provider, we will be using state notifier provider. Now, if you look at this, you can see it takes two parameters. One isn't like one needs to currently I'm passing it a null value, so it's showing me a null, and it also needs an object. So for that, similar to how if you have used provider before, similar to provider, you need to create a counter class which extends state notify provider. Okay. And let's just create a constructor. right? And we have some. So all right, instead of state, it should be state, no, state notifier, right? And this state notifier should return a value of integer, because my counter is a type of integer, and its value would be changing over time. And inside my super, I need to provide a default value. So I'm providing it a default value of 0. And here I can define my functions which would be responsible to execute different tasks. So let's say I want to add a functionality for increment. So I can do something. So using this arrow function, what I did is created an function which is void increment, and once void increment is called, the state would be state value would be increased by 1. Similarly, you can create different types of different types of functions like decrement, multiply, divide, or if you have any other type of application functionality into your application, you can just create functions for or methods for them. Now this state notify provider will now return this counter, and inside this return type it will have counter and an integer, right? So uh, so this is your state notifier provider. Like that's the implementation you need to do. You will create a counter notifier provider, and which will be equal to a state notifier provider. And this state notifier provider will return a class which would be extending state notifier. You will need to have provided a default value through its constructor. And inside that, you will call this different methods or different functions which you need to execute using this provider. Now, what all things change here? So instead of reading counter provider, I would be reading counter notifier provider. So let's just reload this and see what changes do we get. Now, I can simply read this provider, right? But if I change this value to counter notifier provider, now it would be again notifier, but instead of directly calling the state, I will be calling that increment function. This increment function is the same that we created. So instead of directly accessing that state or directly manipulating the state, I will be using methods to modify the value of that state, right? So if you reload this application and just try to run this again, you can see that value of this provider increases. Now, like you got the understanding of how state notifier provider and state provider are different. Can you zoom in a bit? Okay. Is it good? Like, is it visible now? I guess this should be visible. Okay, so I will continue. Now, you got the understanding between when to use a state provider and when to use a state notifier provider. Basically, if you just want to modify the value of just a single provider or a single entity like integer, you should use state provider. And if you want to work with something known as objects, or you need to change the value of maps, you should use state counter notifier provider so that you can implement proper methods or proper functions to execute your task, right? So this was about state notifier provider. Now let's see how change notifier provider works, right? Now, actually, what Riverpod suggests is that you shouldn't use change notifier provider into your large scale applications. That's because Change notify provider was introduced to provide an easy migration to those who are shifting from provider to Riverpod. So its implementation is quite similar of provider, but the way you use is kind of different. So let's see what all things are different and how you should use change notify provider. And currently Riverpod doesn't recommend using change notify provider, but we'll just see how it is implemented. So let's create one more provider and name it change notify provider. Now, as you might guess, this would be equal to change notify provider. And similarly, I will be creating a class. Let's say it would be counter notifier. And this would be extending, like this would extend a change notifier. But this change notifier is from the Flutter package itself. It's a core class inside your Flutter. It's not from Riverpod. Change notifier is something that we are getting from Flutter itself. Those who have used provider might be familiar with this syntax or might be knowing what change notifier is. So how does it work? Like, you need to create a constructor, but before creating, you need to create a variable that will hold the value. So this is my integer which would be holding that value. Let's say I'm naming it a count, and I need to create a getter for this. So it could be something like I will get the value of this. This is how I initialize my count, and this is how I would be getting my count. Now, similar to above, I will create increment function, and I need to increase the value of count. Like, there's nothing known as state. You have to use this variable or this value, this variable whose value needs to be changed. Right. So this is my count plus plus, and let's see if this works or not. So instead of counter notify provider, it's now counter change notify. So like we are using a very large names, but it's just to distinguish between different kinds of provider that they are creating. You should use shorter names for your providers. So if I just reload this, and initially it has a value of null. Okay, because here we are returning a value of null. Here we need to pass counter notify. All right, and I guess I don't have any doubts. So let's just reload this again. So as you can see, you are getting a value instance of counter notify. That's because here you need to use that getter. So instead of counter, you have to use this count. This count is this getter, which will be returning us the value of this count variable. So, and now we can just convert it to a string. And let's rebuild this application once again. Okay, now you can see this value of 0, right? Now inside my, just let me just copy this provider once again and replace my counter notify provider with counter change notify provider. And I guess I misspelled the spelling of increment. Let it. So let's see if it works or not. If I now try to increment the value, you will see it isn't working, right? But why is it? Because this change notifier also needs something known as notify listeners. Inside every function that you create, you also need to call this notify listeners, so that every value or every method or every variable that is listening to this provider gets notified that its value have changed. So now if I reload this application and try to increment, you can see this application works fine. So as I said, that this part is similar to how you use in your provider state management package. Only it is provided so that you can make a quick migration from provider to Riverpod. But you shouldn't use this, because as you saw that you need to create something called something known as notify listeners. Like you need to notify the users, while in case of change notifier, which is provided by Riverpod, you just need to increase the value or change the value of that state, and it automatically gets updated. But in case of change notifier, which was from the provider package, or that's how you used your provider package, you need to use something known as notify listeners. Right? Now that was one of the reasons that uh, why you shouldn't use provider package, or why you should shift to Riverpod. So I guess we have only left with future provider and stream provider. So before moving to future provider and stream provider, how about creating a small functionality using Riverpod? So any suggestions on what kind of functionality? What I think is that we should create a functionality where we can change the theme of our app using Riverpod, right? Can we go ahead by changing the theme from dark theme to light theme and light theme to dark theme using Riverpod? Shall we continue using that if everything is clear till now? Okay, I can see yes. So let's just continue and create an application which would change the theme, create a functionality, I would say, that would change the theme of our app, and we will handle that state using Riverpod, right? So, and we have too many providers. So let's create a provider, and let's name this provider is dark theme, and it would be a state provider. And let's give it this dark theme provider. Now it would have a value of ref, and initially, let's say it has a value, it has a default value of false. Like initially, I have my light theme, right? I don't have my dark theme. So, and where can I change my theme? So, if you have worked with Flutter, you know that all the changes to my theme has to be done inside my theme data. And how will I do that? So there is something known as brightness, and if you change the brightness to brightness.dark, you can see, and okay, let's just remove this and reload this application. You can see that my app has switched to a dark theme, and if I change it to light, which is the default, it changes to a dark theme. So by any way, if we can toggle this brightness, we can change the theme of the application, right? So let's just do that. And we have a dark theme provider. Now let's make this stateless widget as a consumer widget, because we need to access ref inside this. And once we change it to a consumer widget, it would also need a parameter ref. And let's read the value of that provider. And it is dark theme, and it would be ref.watch, and we would be reading the value of my this dark theme provider. All right, and we'll just add a quick check. If it's a dark theme, then my brightness would be would be dark, and if not, my brightness would be, or my theme would be a light, right? Now if I reload my application, you can see that by default this theme is a light theme. Now if I change the value of this from this dark theme provider from false to true, and if I reload this application again, you can see my application is in a dark theme. So this provider is getting read properly. Now we need a way so that we can toggle this functionality or toggle this theme. So let's just remove all this code We don't need this. Like we are done creating a column or creating a counter application. But instead of removing this, let's have just a button beside this. So I would be using a switch and it needs a default value. So I'm providing it a default value of false and it has an on change callback. So which takes a value and you can do something with that value, right? And you might be knowing what we will be doing. We would be changing that value and providing it to our provider. So as you can see, I have a switch and we need to access this. We need to make this switch functional. So let's create a, let's watch the value of our dark theme, or let's just copy this line. Now, I have my piece dark theme, right? And so the default value would be the default value of my dark theme. So it has a default value of this dark theme. So now if I reload my application, you can see the switch is in its on stage or it's like activated stage. Now I need to change the value of this switch. So how we can change it? We can change it in this on change parameter. So I can use something known as ref.read. What I said that if you need to change the value of these providers, you have to use something known as ref.read. So I would be reading this dark theme provider, and to access its state, I need to use notifier, and I will just give it the value of that on change. Now, if you reload this application and turn off this switch, you will see that your application switches from dark theme to a light theme. And if you again turn on the switch, your application changes from light theme to dark theme. So you are handling the theme of your application. All this is using Riverpod. All the state management of all this state is getting managed by Riverpod of this dark theme application. Right? Understood? Wasn't it cool to change the theme of this application? And it just took us a couple of lines, right? We just created a provider. We provided the value of that provider wherever it's necessary. And just at a single place, we changed this, not here. Where is my switch? Okay. So at just one place, we changed the value of this provider. And using just 3 simple steps, you created an application which can change the theme of your app, right? Using Riverpod. Understood? You can just type down yes if it's clear how we created, how we changed the theme of this application. Okay. So I guess we can move forward to see what is a future provider and what is a stream provider, right? Now for doing that, I would be creating a different page. So I would just create a folder and I will give it a name. My user.dart. So why did I create this application? Why did I create this screen? Is because we'll see how you can make API calls and how you can handle the API calls or the network calls using Riverpod. So let's see. Before moving that, let's see which API we will be using. So we'll be using a public API. So if you just type JSON placeholder, this is a website which you can use to test your applications using a fake API. And this has something known as a users API. So if you just hit the endpoint of users, we'll get a list of users in this API. We will see how you can retrieve these value of users using Riverpod, and you can handle the network calls, the loading state, the error state, and how you can change the value or you can update the state once this call has been completed. So before Using that, I would be using a website known as quicktype.com. So this is a website which lets you convert model classes of the JSON response. So if you just copy all of the JSON response and just go to quicktype.io and give it name of the class and paste your JSON response and change the programming language from Swift to Dart. Now you will see it has created a model class. Now why do we need this model class? Now you might know that this JSON object, which the data which you get into your Flutter application is in a form of a JSON string. To access this, you need to decode that JSON string into a JSON object. And to access that JSON object more easily and to make sure it's type safe, we uh, we map it to a user model so that we can easily access these values, right? So it's not necessary, but it's just a good practice to do this. So let's just copy this code, and inside I would be creating another folder, and this would be user.dart. So I created another folder which will contain my models, and inside this I have my user.dart. So I will just simply paste it, and that's what you need to do. You can just close this. Now, how to use Future Provider? So to make requests to an API, you also need a HTTP package. So let's install HTTP package. You can also use DO package if you use it for making network calls. And before that, we will also see what are the limitations that Future Provider covers in using a regular Future. So I have my screen, my users. Let's just create a basic material.dart. Let's use a Flutter stateful widget, or let's say stateful consumer, and it would have a name my users. You can just import it. And by the way, as you saw, there is a consumer widget, and there is also something known as a consumer stateful widget. Now this is like like the way consumer widget is a replacement for a stateless widget. Consumer stateful widget is the Riverpod alternative for a stateful widget. Now, what are the benefits of using a consumer stateful widget? It's give you direct access to ref. See, you don't have to pass any ref inside your build context. You can directly use ref to access your provider, right? So that's why we are using it. And instead of a container, let's simply return a scaffold. And let's just place user string. Okay, my user screen is created. Let's copy this name. And instead of passing my home page, I will be passing this consumer my users page. And you can see I have a screen which is user screen. Now, so I need to make API calls. Now, if you have worked with Flutter before, you know that for making any API calls or any network calls or using something known as async await, we use a widget known as future. Now, how does future works? I will just give a quick demo of how future works. So if you type in a future, or let's say future builder. So if you see, it takes a future, and for this you need to provide it a something known as future for just purpose of testing. I would be passing it something known as future delay, and let's just remove this constructor. Now this builder takes your context and it also takes something known as snapshot. Now, why am I explaining this? It's because you can understand, like, why do we use a future provider instead of a future builder? Like, what benefits does it provide you if you're using a future builder, right? So you have something known as snapshot, and what you usually do, it's like if snapshot dot has data, you would do something, right? And you will create this something known as if snapshot dot has error, you might display an error, or something known as if snapshot dot connection state is double equal to connection state dot waiting. Now, let me minimize this. So this is usually how you do it, right? You check if it has data, you will show some data. If it has an error, you will show that error. And if it's in a loading state, you will display something on something like a circular progress indicator. This is how you will use a future builder. Now let's see what kinds of benefit does a future provider provides us and how we can use that instead of using a future builder, right? So I will be creating a provider. Let's name it future provider. And this will be of a type future provider. It returns something. So let me just remove this. So you will see this user providers is currently have a value of null because I'm not returning anything. So I can make this API call here itself. So I need to import my HTTP package. And what I can do is I just simply call http.get and pass in my API endpoint. So this is my API endpoint, which is JSON placeholder / users. So this is my JSON endpoint. I can use something known as async await to wait for the network call to be get completed. But just to keep things simple, and you don't have to understand what async await is, this get method has something known as .then. So .then is basically once this request is completed, what needs to be done. So once this network request is completed, then do this stuff. What we need to do, we need to map all this data and return it to users provider. What are we going to map? We are going to map the string response that we are getting from the API to this list of objects, list of users, you can say. So I will call this users from JSON function, which is auto-generated from QuickType, and you can see that it takes a string. This string is basically a JSON string, which you are getting from your API. So you can just say users from JSON, and you can pass value.body, and you can simply return this, right? So that's how you created a future provider. You made an API request, you map that value, and you return that value into your users provider, right? So okay, let's just close this and get back to my users. Now let's see how we can use this instead of a future build. So let's remove all this scaffold, and instead of returning, like, we can directly return ref. We can watch. What we need to watch is my users provider, right? And if you see, like, just for example, if I assign it a value, you will see it returns a future provider and a list of users. So this users provider will have something known as when. So now this when has access, we have different values, which are data, and what you need to do if once I get the data, what I need to do once if there is an error. And what I need to do, there is a loading state. So I can just return all my widgets inside this. So for data, we will get the data and do something. In the case of error, we will get error and also stack trace. We can also then do something. And in the case of loading, it's simply a loading state. And we need to just return the value of every state. So we will be returning a scaffold. There are some things which would be similar. So let's just copy this and paste it here. Let's just first handle error state and loading state. Then we'll get back to how we can handle if data is getting shown. So you can just add return and return here. Now, if I have an error, I can just display error loading data. And if it's currently in a loading state, I can use circular progress indicator. And let's mark this constant so that it stops bothering us. Right now, these are all the states that will be handling when if we get an error or if we are in the loading state. Now, if once I get this data, I need to show that data. Now, simply you can use a list view dot builder because we are getting a list of users and we need to build that list. So we will be using list view dot builder, and it needs item count. So we will getting item count from this data. So if you see, this data is my list of users. So it would just be data dot length, and it also needs an item builder. Item builder needs context and index. Context and index, right? And what will I return it? Let's say I return a column. Inside this column, I would be just be displaying two things, which are the name of the user. So I can do data dot data, and at that current index, I can access uh, different properties of that user. So I will be displaying this name. And what else do I need? Let's just also display email of that user. Okay. So we have handled all that state. If we get a data, we will display that data. If we get an error, we will show that error. And if we are in the loading state, we will show this loading state. Now, if I just reload this application, you will see we are getting a loading circular progress indicator and then all the data. So obviously this data is a bit scattered. Let's just make it a bit nicer looking, I would say. Remove this. Let's let it be. I can use cross axis alignment. Dot start. Provide it a bit padding. Some styling. So let's just provide some styling, not a lot of. So increase the size first of all, and the size would be default size is 18, so we can show it 24. And similar styling, I would provide it to my email. Instead of 24, it would have a smaller size, and let's say a lighter color. So if I reload my application, you can see there is a loading state, and then I get all my data as soon as my data is getting loaded. Now, what if there is an error? So let's say I I provided this wrong endpoint. Instead of users, I provided something random, and this would obviously not work. So if I now reload my application, it will call that API, it will get an error, and it will just display error loading data, right? So you saw how easy it is to you make network calls using Riverpod, and Riverpod does all of that thing to you. It handles your state, it handles when the data is getting updated and when to change that data on the screen. And then the code is much more readable, right? So you know what I need to do when I have my data, what I need to do if I have an error, and what I need to do if it's currently in a loading state, what I need to display on my UI. And when it's getting updated, you don't have to handle that. Riverpod will handle it for you, right? So understood like how to use future provider. You can just type in into your chat box like if you understood how to use future provider. Hmm, if you have any doubt, you can ask before we move forward to creating any a different application using Riverpod because the session is going to be till 9, I guess. So we can create one more application to see how Riverpod works. Or if you have any doubts till now, you can ask it. Okay, so the last provider is my stream provider. Now, I won't be explaining stream provider because I have explained how you can replace future builder with future provider. And similarly, in a similar way, you can replace your stream provider, a stream builder with stream provider. So while using stream builder, you might have used stream builder if you are making any calls to let's say a WebSocket where you continuously want to listen to a stream of data. Or if you have used any backend as a service software like Firebase, AppWrite, Supabase, all of these have something known as a real-time API or a real-time subscription. In using Stream Builder, you can subscribe to that real-time subscription and then listen to that value. Similarly, you can do the same thing using Stream Provider. So I would say that would be a takeaway task for you. The way we replace this future builder with future provider, try replacing Stream Builder with Stream Provider. And if you have any doubts, you can ask me. But that's a takeaway for you. You can try it once this stream is ended and once you're experimenting with Riverpod. So let's just give stream provider as a takeaway. Try to implement stream provider in place of stream builder, right? All right. So we have built different kinds of application. How about creating a grocery app, like a functionality to add groceries to your cart and see how to manage state using this? It's like creating a e-cart application where we will be implementing add to cart feature. So if that sounds interesting, just type down like yes, we can continue creating our e-cart application. Okay. So let's just create an e-cart application, right? So where we can add items to our cart and let's see how to handle state in that case. Before that, we need to have, let's say data for the items which we would be adding to my cart. So I have a class pre-built. So I will just create a file grocery.dart. And I've just pre-built an list of groceries. So you can see this is a grocery list, and this is just a list of objects which contain different kinds of groceries like milk, eggs, cheese. Like you get the point. Like this is like a sample data of groceries which we would be seeing how to implement. And we also have a screen. So let's just create my grocery screen. And I also have a boilerplate code for this. So let me just copy and paste. So instead of this grocery page, instead of my users, I will be returning this grocery page. And just let's view. So what I have done is nothing. I have a sample data, and using this sample data, I've just created a basic UI, and you can see it's a very basic UI. I've used a list view.builder to iterate over all the elements in my grocery list and just display the image, the name of, and the price of that item. Right? It's a very basic UI. If you have worked with Flutter, you can create this kind of a UI. But even if you need this sample, I will be sharing the GitHub repository for it. But it's a very simple UI, right? And see, there is an add to cart button, and there is also an icon, or let's say a cart screen. Now, if what kind of functionality do we need to add? If I click on add to cart, my item needs to be added into my cart, and this cart needs to update. And if I move to my cart screen, I need to see all that kind of all the items which I have added into my cart, right? So this is my elevated button or add to cart button, which you can see is empty currently. And I'm also displaying this 0 over here, which indicates the number of items in that cart. So it's just the basic UI, and we'll see how you can add functionality or how you can add this feature of add to cart, right? So the first step is to create a provider. So stream provider is your homework or takeaway. So let's just understand how we will be doing this. So the correct way is to pass on the correct way to implement add to cart functionality in any kind of e-commerce application is to insert that object or that product object into your my cart list of arrays. But just to keep things simple, I will be just inserting the index of this item into my provider. Like the provider will just have the index of that item, and then I can access that index from this my list of groceries. Right? I won't be inserting that object, because if I want to insert that object, I need to again create a model class for it, and that's kind of a different topic. Right? We need to see how you can handle state using Flutter Riverpod. So what I will be doing is I would just be adding that uh, index of that particular item in that array to my add to cart variable or add to cart provider, so that once I need to access it, I can access it directly, or you can just access that index, and using that index you can access it at that item from your grocery list. Now what I mean to say is you can will just understand. So let's create a provider. Let's say this is cart provider, because we need to add items to my cart, and I will be using state notifier provider. And why am I using a state notifier provider instead of a state provider? You will get to know. So let's create a class, because as you know, if I need to use state notifier provider, I need to use a class. So let's name this class as cart, which will extend state notifier. And what this would return is a list of integers. That means the list of indexes which are added to my cart, right? And I understand. Now, initially, as in the constructor, I can create an empty list. So initially, my list is empty. Now there would be a functionality to add the element. So I can do something known as I will get that index. So let's say ID, and once I get this ID, I can just add that ID inside my array which I am creating or the array provider. So how you can do? You can do it something like this. So what does this do is adds the ID or adds the array, adds the index which you are passing through this into your current state. So every integer or every index you would be adding would be getting added to this element, right? Now I also need to add a functionality to remove elements. So it would also take an ID, like which ID need to be removed. So you can access standard list methods. So if you call it state dot where, and you are getting element, so this can be element. Now that element should not be equal to my element which is getting passed, and this can be similar to ID, and you can return it to a list. So basically what I have done is I will find where this element is and accept the element which I am passing to my remove function. Every else element would be added to my new list, and that new list would be getting returned. That means logically the element, the ID which I am passing to my remove function, that ID would no longer exist in that array, in that list, right? So the next step would be to pass this cart, and what this would have is cart and my list of integers, right? So this is the provider. This is how the provider would be created. Now let's see how you can access this, or you can how add the elements to this provider. Is the okay? So where is my grocery screen? This is my grocery screen. Yes, you can do list.remove. Uh, that's also a way, but I've used list state.where element just to uh, just to show you that how the element is getting removed. That if you see this where it creates a new element and which satisfy all the functionalities. Now let's say if you need to run some filters on that list, like if you have shopped into your e-commerce application, you can apply different filters, and depending upon the condition of that filter, a new list has to be removed. So if you have to do that kind of feature, you have to use list.state.view. And if you're not using, if you're just need removing an element, you can directly use list.remove, right? So because I'm using this consumer state, I have access to ref all over my widget. So let's just access this. We can use cart items, and this would be ref. This would be watching my cart provider, right? Now, if you hover over this list cart items, we would say it takes a list of integers. That means it would be having a list of indexes of the items that are getting added to the cart. Now, if I zoom in, you can see I have created a cart icon which is having an indication of 0. Now, this indicates how many items are there in this cart. So, and that value is being provided by this 0. Now we need to change it, right? So it would be the number of elements present in my cart. So what I can do is something as cart items dot length, right? And just convert it to a string. So now if I reload my app, you can see it works the same way. And currently there are no items in that cart, so it's displaying this value of 0. So as soon as the items get added, this value or this number would get increased automatically. Now, how you can add items? So again, you can use ref.read, and what I need to read is my cart provider, and to access the state I need notifier. Once I have access, see I have all the functions that are available inside a list, right? So I can just use state.add, and what value I need to add is the index, right? So why am I, so you can see that inside my list view.builder, I'm iterating over this index, and whichever the current index is, it needs to get added into my cart. Makes sense? And if you have any doubt, you can ask. Okay, I shall continue. If I see any doubts, I will answer it on the go. Now we are getting a warning that the member state can only be used with an instant member. So what does it indicate? That we don't need this state. We can directly use notifier and just add the current index, right? So let's see if that functionality is working or not. We can just quickly check it. If I click on add to cart, you can see the value of my number is increased. Now if I zoom it in a bit, so you can see there are currently 1 items. So if I just add a second item, you can see again the value is increased to 2, right? It means that items are getting, or the index are getting added to my cart, right? But as you can see, we again have this button add to cart. We don't need this button add to cart. So we can just add a quick check. And what can be that check? So where we have a cart, see we have a cart items, and this is a elevated button. We can just add a check that if cart items dot contains this particular index, then you can, like, instead of a elevated button, you can show a button to remove that item. That would be simple. Remove item, right? And if my element doesn't, if the widget is not in this, like if the item is not added to the cart, it would show the text add item to the cart. And to remove this, to remove the items from the cart, you can simply call the remove function which we created and provided the index. So if I now reload my application, so I have a button add item to the cart. As soon as I click on this, my items get added, and the add item to the cart button changes to remove item. So you can see as soon as you add items to the cart, you will get this icon remove item. And once you click on this remove item, the item will get removed from the cart, and you will again get this text which is add item to the cart, right? So that means my items are getting added to the cart. Now let's just also display the cart. That would be a better way of showing like actually the items are getting added. So let me just create a second screen which is cart.dart. And I would be quickly creating an stateful widget. So it would be a stateful consumer, and let's give it a name cart screen. Import filter Riverpod. And also in scaffold, right? So like we need to navigate to the cart screen, so just add a navigator. So this is my shopping icon button. I can just add a navigator. Dot push. So it has already access to context. And let's use Cupertino page route. And what is the name of my screen? It is cart screen. So let's copy this and paste it here and import this cart screen. Right. So now if I click on groceries, you can see it's getting navigated to my cart page. Currently this cart page is empty, so I'm getting an empty screen. But let's see how you can display all the items added to a cart to that screen. Now, first of all, we need to read that cart provider. So let's just read that cart provider using ref.watch. What are we watching? We are watching cart provider. Okay, so we are getting a list of items, right? So what we can do is first just create an amber. Then we will know that we are on the cart screen. Okay, we have a cart page. Let's just see if the values are getting added to this, or what are the indexes which are getting added to my cart page, cart items, right? So I can use something like body. So obviously I need to use listview.builder again. Item builder would have context and index. And what would be my item count? The number of items present in my cart would be item counts.length. And this would be returning just a second. All right. This would be returning a simple text. And text would be from my cart items. And what's the element that is getting added. So this is just a check to see what all elements are getting added to my cart. And let's also add a quick check here. If cart items dot length, or let's say is empty, then show a center widget. Inside the center widget, show a text that cart is empty. Right? Let's check our application. So now if you navigate here, you can see you did get this text which is cart is empty. Shall we just increase this? Okay. So as you can see, there are no items in the cart, so we are getting this text which is cart is empty. Now if I add item to my cart, you can see I'm getting the index. It's very small, but if I zoom, so you can see I'm getting the index of that item which is getting added to my cart. So if I add another item, let's say this, if I'm adding this cake, and if I navigate to my cart screen, you can see these are the two elements or two indexes that are getting added to my cart. Now using these indexes, we need to show that item or show that item from my grocery list inside my cart page. And that should be fairly easy. And we would be following this kind of an UI. So let's just copy this UI which we have created using listview.builder. So let's just copy this listview.builder and display it here. We need to import grocery list. So currently all the items are getting added, but we need to add a check. And first of all, the item count should be equal to the items present in my cart, right? And secondly, I need to access the image. So how should I access the image from that index which is present in my cart items? And using that index, I need to access that grocery list. So let's access that grocery list. We need to access that grocery list, and we have to provide it an index. That index would be equal to the element which is present in my cart items, and that index, that value I would be getting from this index. Or this would have something known as image, and all of this will be converted into a string, right? So we are using cart items, and this cart items would be having an index. All right, I did messed up with my bracket size. Let's see. Huh. All right, so you can just understand this code. I'm accessing the item present in my grocery list. So grocery list needs an index. That index is I'm getting it from my cart items. Like the value of that index, I'm getting it from the cart items provider. And of that object, I'm accessing its image. Similarly, even here, instead of accessing this image, I can access the name. And over here, instead of accessing the image, I can access the price. And because the item is already into the cart, it won't have an option of add item to the cart. So let's just remove this part. Like there is only one condition, that the item is already present inside my cart. So let's rebuild our application and see if it works or not. Okay, so I have, let's say I add this X to my cart and I get this item like I have added. And let me just increase the size of this emulator. Okay, I hope this is quite visible. And if I add this bread item, and if I just navigate to my cart items, you can see the eggs and bread which I have just added are getting added to my carts. Now, the most important thing is managing the state. If I remove now, if you see this X button is showing this text which is remove item because the item is already present in my cart. But instead of removing this X from my grocery list, if I remove this item from my cart space, and okay, I guess I haven't removed it from here. Let me just reload it. My cart. Okay. So if you add these items, you can see these all items are getting added. And if you, let's say, remove this item, which is this butter, you can see the butter is no longer present in here, right? And if you click on remove item, all my items are getting deleted from this cart. You can just play around with it. Like if I try to add butter, bread, cake, cheese, I get this remove item because that item is already present in the cart. If I go to my cart page, and as soon as I remove this item from this cart, the list gets updated. And if I go back here, you can see I again have this icon which is add item to the cart because the item is removed from the cart. So if I just remove this item, you will see these all items are getting removed. Well, okay, there is a bug, I would say. If anyone can find that bug, okay, there is a bug in this project, in this current application. If you guys can identify this bug, items are getting added to this cart, and items are also getting removed from the cart. See, but there is a small bug in here. If you can identify it, or if you have understood it, just what like you have understood this feature, how you can manage the state of adding items to the cart using Riverpod. You can also type in yes, like we have understood. Has anyone got the bug? Okay, that bug is also a takeaway. If you can't find that bug, I will be sharing this project. You can just create a PR if you find that bug and just fix that issue. So I've got a text. Is that the item with less index with respect to growth should be removed first? Well, you got it partially correct, I would say. There's something related to this index. Like that's the hint. And here you are accessing two indexes, first of all. First, we are accessing the index of this grocery list, and we are also accessing this index of my cart items. So you might get confused between these, but you can just test your application again. Once I share it with clone it your app, run this application at your own machine and just see if there is any bug. Or if it wasn't any bug, it was just an Easter egg. So we have our application ready, right? And all the state is getting managed through Riverpod. I would say that's all. We are also like we are well in time, and whatever time is kept, I can like you can ask your doubts using Riverpod, or if you have any doubts in general with Flutter, you can ask me. And I'm just stopping my screen share. So if anyone has any doubts regarding whatever they have learned or learn regarding Riverpod in this live stream, you can ask it into the comment section. So is there any difference between stateless and stateful consumer widget? See, there is nothing known as a stateless consumer widget. There is stateless widget and stateful widget, and their replacements are state consumer widget and consumer stateful widget. Now, the main difference between, if I can show you again, let me just share my screen once more. Okay, so inside your consumer stateful widget, you are getting this ref inside this consumer state, right? Makes sense? Like you can see I haven't passed my ref or widget ref inside my build context. While in the case, if I go to my main.dart, if I'm using a consumer widget, I need to pass this build method a widget ref so that I can use ref.watch or I can use ref to consume my widgets. But in case of using consumer stateful widget, I don't need to pass it explicitly. It is already present in this consumer state. And also, let's say you want to still use set state for some use cases. So you can use set state over here, even in your consumer stateful widget. Like the whole motive of Riverpod was to replace your set state and so that you can use Riverpod. But if there is any use case where you need to use set state, you can also do that. And if you just go to its implementation, you can see further it is extending a stateful widget itself. This consumer stateful widget is extending a stateful widget. That means it has all the features of an existing stateful widget with some additional features which you can use to access your providers. Right? If that makes sense. And let me just stop this app, and I won't stop screen sharing. So if anyone has any doubts, they can ask it. Like if you understood the difference between a stateless and a stateful consumer widget. If you don't have any doubts, you can just give it a hi. But is it advised that we mix test state with and Riverpod? See, the main functionality of Riverpod is to replace your set state. But there can be some minute details, minute features which you need to implement. Where in that case, using Riverpod would be something like over engineering the stuff. In that case, you can use set state. There won't be any issue. Set state just basically rebuilds recalls the build method so that your UI can get updated. But if there is a small use case, then using Riverpod you can say it's getting over engineered. So if you're building a scalable application, use Riverpod. But if there is a smaller functionality which you need to add into your widget, you can use SetScript. There's no issue.
Oh, I guess it's just me asking questions. What others? Did you understand what Riverpod is?
Where can I? Okay, so I've pasted a link of Flutter Riverpod already. Or there is already a link. So currently, Riverpod, the documentation for Riverpod is going a rehaul and it would be migrated to Riverpod 2. But currently, you can follow the documentation which is provided. But there is also newer version of Riverpod 2. So there are two different kinds of documentation present. And I can even share that. So we'll see there is one more link. And this is the version 2. Like Riverpod 2 is currently going an overhaul in the its documentation. And there are many features in Riverpod 2 like text generation, code generation, annotations. These are all the features that are getting added to Riverpod 2, but the basics would be still be same. And if anyone is from Nagpur, they can just drop an hi. Hi, Parshav. Hi, Gaurav. Hello to Flutter Nagpur.
Perfect. I guess there are no more questions, and we are all good to go. Okay.
Hi, Atul.
Yeah. So So that was Rohit Ranjan talking all about Riverpod and playing with states in Flutter. In case you have any doubts regarding state management or Riverpod, you can reach out to Rohit on his socials that I've mentioned in the comment section. Uh, also, he is available on Flutter Nagpur's Discord. So if you haven't joined the Discord, you can do that, and he'll be more than happy to address you there and solve your issues. Thanks a lot, Rohit, giving your time on a Saturday evening and not partying, maybe.
Well, it's a weekend, and weekend is meant to have fun for corporate employees.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Rohit.
Okay, thank you. And
Now, yeah.
for the attendees, I have provided a takeaway of implementing Stream Provider. So if anyone has doubt implementing Stream Provider or any difficulties, you can just reach out to me.
Also, on this note, we Flutter Nagpur provide a task for every session. So the task for this session would be exploring stream providers and finding the bug in the application that we built today. That's the grocery shopping application. So the one to do so would be rewarded with the swags that I just mentioned at the start of the session. I would like to take a moment to mention that we are at the end of the boot camp. And if you have any suggestions for us on what next session should we take, please feel free to scan the QR and recommend us, maybe. and we value your feedback so that we ensure that we don't make our mistakes and improve the quality of events that we conduct in Flutter Nagpur. So do provide your feedback. And by saying this, I would like to thank everyone present here attending the session uh, for spending time on a Saturday evening learning with us and growing together. Hope you have a fun day tomorrow, Sunday, exploring Riverpod and making applications.
I have a small suggestion or feedback.
Yes, sure.
So my feedback would be to like like you should organize offline events and sponsor the speakers travel.
Definitely, definitely. We'll try for that next time. Nice suggestion. Yeah. Thanks a lot, everyone. Now let's just end this stream and get going with our night. Yay. Bye bye.
I